Hello and welcome to week 13 here in Psych 101, and we're going to be talking about a couple chapters today, and we're going to start off with one of my favorite topics. I think I've probably said that 1,000 times. I love psychology, but this one has a special place in my heart because I ended up getting some advanced education in this area, and when of course I'm talking about chapter 13, which is industrial organizational psychology. So here we are in chapter 13, and this might be something that you have not necessarily heard of before. And just to give you a little bit of background on that, where it is today, where this field is today, called human factors engineering, which is when we're looking at the processes of education, construction, management, how, public safety. Human factors engineering is the knowledge base where we look at the role that humans play. Now, it has its origins in manufacturing, where people are operating machines, and the way we look at how people operate machines in order to keep them from harming themselves and to increase productivity and all that. I'll get into a little bit of the history of it before, but it's basically the human factor and analyzing the human factor, brain and body, when it comes to activity. Now, when I first started at KVCC, I had a master's degree in counseling, and I was teaching psychology. Now, I wanted to get some additional knowledge base in terms of instruction and those kind of things. So I found a very, very cool degree at Boise State University. Now, technically speaking, the master's degree that I got at Boise State, this is after I started at KV, was in instructional and performance technology. That particular title is now human factors engineering. It was actually in the engineering program at Boise State, and to this day, the most useful degree I've ever taken. It was every class about instructional design, about technology, ergonomics, operating in spaces, how to interact with other people, lighting, the height of your desk. I mean, everything, all of that stuff really, really all crunched into this one degree. And it was very, very fun and very, very engaging. So I'm going to show you a couple examples of the kind of insights and knowledge that come from this study, both, from its origins working in industry all the way up to today. So here we have, look at this diagram here, looking at the math and angular rotation type calculations that go into creating the maximum comfort inside of an automobile. And if you look down to the right, this is very interesting here at the right, in terms of the angle of the chair looking, over the top of the dashboard, you look at race cars are the highest, then sports cars, automobiles, trucks and vans, agriculture, they sort of lean back. You see that on the right-hand side. And these are all calculated in turn to create seats and seating mechanisms that are ideal for the uses that we're using them for, based on the size of the person. Here's another one. This is at your desk, and you might have even heard about this, where your computer screen should be in terms of the angle of your head, how up and down your eyes should go, your back is straight, your feet are on the ground, how high is the keyboard, is the keyboard at an angle? You can see on the right we have a 15-degree angle going up on the keyboard, those kind of things. All of these calculations coming into the world of psychology and industry as ergonomics. Now this primarily, we saw these things coming out in early industries because if we built machines that were easy to use within the framework, range of motion and of human beings, then you would have less injuries. You'd have less aching backs because someone's bent over a workstation too far. Let's bring that material close to them and enable them to work this way. No more aching back. Responding and creating machines that worked better with human beings. There's probably no better realization than this, than the user interface that you experience every day on your computer. Now, whether you're using a Mac or whether you're using a Windows-based PC or even Google Chrome, there are icons. And those icons were designed for easy learning. If you make and so sorry for the interruption there. I had to change the batteries in my little microphone over here. So what I was saying, we have the user interface. I have folders. They're shaped like little manila folders. There's no reason for that other than I'm conscious of the idea that when I say folder, that's what I'm thinking about. In the Mac world, we have the trash can. In the Windows world, there's a recycle bin. And it's like, well, that's easy to learn. It's easier to teach somebody how to use computers when you have this interface with familiar looking icons on them. And there's a science to this. Now, I'm an Apple fan, so I'm going to talk about them. And of course, Apple is extremely well known for its industrial design. Very well known for its easy to use interface, whether you use that computer, that type of computer or not. The reason why Apple's still around is because of their advances in the design of user interfaces. And when individuals are creating apps for the App Store within that environment, they have to follow guidelines put out by Apple for certain ways in which their apps are designed in order to keep in line with that easy-to-use philosophy. And these are published guidelines, human interface guidelines for both the Mac OS and iOS, for Apple TV, for if anybody wants to make something that works on these computers, they have to get their designs to work within the framework of the Apple user interface. And so these are very important things. They're important things about the experience of a machine. When you go into a computer program, let's say, and it's laid out in a familiar way with all the other apps that you're using on that computer, well, it's just that much easier to learn. And that's the point. When we are dealing with machines, how do we make them work well with human beings? And that's kind of the whole thing about industrial organizational psych. Now, there's a lot of other ways in which psychology goes into the workplace, and they're all jumbled into industrial organizational psych. So let's take a look at some of those. We have the psychology of supervision, how to organize work areas for efficiency, how close should the parts be to where you're going to be using them, those kind of things, the assembly line. We have work time, the whole concept of how long can a person go without breaks, having breaks and when they should happen in order to maximize efficiency, how to do evaluations that are actually productive and produce the kinds of changes that you would like. What about pay cycles? Why is it that we have this get paid every other week thing? And that was really some studies that occurred early in the Industrial Revolution where companies who, while holding on to your money that you made last week, could invest that in short-term return, make some money on your money because they delayed actually paying you for 2 weeks. And they found out that pretty much you could only go about 2 weeks before you started interfering with some people's productivity. They want to get paid more frequently than that. There's other pay cycles, once a month, once a year. Some people go for, they go for grants where they only get paid once, maybe for several years, and they're living off of that money. But generally speaking, human beings respond pretty well to every other week. And that's part of the psychology of the workplace. So in addition to this, we have issues of probably one of the central tenets of industrial organizational psych was the idea of productivity, getting the maximum output of this very peculiar part of our machine, the human being. So let's take a look at some of its roots. Here we have the founder of the scientific management principles, and he wrote this book, Principles of Scientific Management, in 1911. Frederick Taylor. And at that point, he was looking at, obviously, the Industrial Revolution and how people were working in factories. And he came up with some ideas. And it's interesting to think that these weren't around before then. They seem so common sense right now, but it took Mr. Taylor to go in and do some experimenting with productivity on the assembly line to come up with these particular ideas, such as scheduled break times, the arrangement of materials so that they're within easy reach, maybe in the order that you're using them, time studies in terms of productivity during different parts of the day and different days of the week. This is actually where we get the notion of hump week or hump day being Wednesday. And that in the original Frederick Taylor studies, when you're looking at productivity on a Monday through Friday. Now, prior to this time, or right around the same time, there was a negotiation of the weekend within industry. Now, and that the reason why we have Saturday and Sunday is because in the larger cities, where there are mixed ethnic groups, some ethnic groups, the holy day was on a Saturday. And with some ethnic groups, the holy day was on a Sunday. So it came to the conclusion that those 2 days would formulate the weekend. So on the calendar, it's the weekends, Sundays over here and Saturdays over here. So the weekends on there, that was negotiated. So it created essentially the 5-day work week. And Frederick Taylor looked at how does productivity change over time? And he found out that after the weekend, people were coming into work, kind of a little down from the up of the weekend. Productivity slowly increased across Monday and Tuesday. Wednesday was the peak day of productivity, and then in anticipation for the weekend, sometimes the productivity would slope off onto Friday, and people were pretty much already gone before the bell rang on Friday. So you get this almost like a bell-shaped curve kind of thing, and that hump happened on Wednesday. And that's why we call Wednesday hump day, like in that really funny commercial that we see. So that came from time studies that were done way back in the early 1900s. In addition to scheduled break times, arrangement of materials, time studies, making machines comfortable, putting padding on the arm where your hand was going to, having nice comfortable seats, having tables that were at the right height, we're getting into ergonomics here, easily reached. We had, levers instead of pulling, instead of pulling a cord, create a lever so that when you're pulling it, you don't have to use as much strength. Just going into the design of the actual manufacturing process. The original screwdrivers were very narrow, and then over time the handles became bigger, not too big, but they became bigger so they would fit comfortably in the hand and not irritate and enable the person to exert maximum force on that screwdriver. This was all science, the scientific management. And you could see that this went even beyond just the machines. We had break times, arrangement of materials, time studies, how supervisors interacted with each other and stuff like that. So it's just very, very cool stuff happening that we so much take for granted right now because of the work of Mr. Taylor. And of course, a little bit later on, we have a couple of people that came along, a husband-wife team of Frank and Lillian Gilbreth. Again, extremely important characters in the field of human factors engineering. And it was really remarkable when you look at when they were working. You have Frank, born in 1868, passing away in 1924, his wife living much longer than he did. He wrote a book called Engineering Worthy Performance, and he had a philosophy that was deeply embedded into the mechanization of manufacturing. Probably, one of the founding parents of the continued pursuit of replacing human labor with machines. Now, what we need to understand is while this was indeed beneficial for the owners, they could have their machines working 24 hours. They only had to pay them once when they bought them. They had to maintain them, those kinds of things. There was a win on that side. But Frank and Lillian Gilbreth very strongly felt that manufacturing things on an assembly line was beneath human dignity. They really felt that that was not something that this great creation of everybody having a really creative mind should be reduced to a machine. And they recognize that there's all kinds of jobs that require human beings, but that those menial labor jobs should probably be given over to machines. And interestingly enough, the era of science fiction burst onto the scene. Asimov's book, I, Robot, and the notion of having machines doing our manual labor for us. This was a big, big deal. We sort of, it's not as ever present. We have machines and stuff, but not as significant as it was back then. Mind blowing, anticipating that by the time you got to our year, we would all have personal assistants that were robots, kind of thing. That whole idea really coming forth on this. Now, look, a couple inventions that I want to mention and these are specific to Lillian. Lillian invented and manufactured and eventually marketed and produced the little foot switch, the little foot lever on the trash can. Because your hands are full. Look at that problem. This is again, a very genius problem solver. You have a handful of stuff that's smelly, and you're going to put it into a can that has a cover on it because it's smelly stuff, and you get to the can. Now what do? Kind of ease up the cover with your finger or something like that. Maybe put it down. Why not create a foot pedal that lifts up the... Again, so commonplace now that we don't know of a time when there wasn't a foot lever on the actual trash can. Now, the other thing that she invented, interestingly enough, were the doors on the refrigerator having shelves on them. The original refrigerators did not. They just closed. But what she recognized was when you open that door, there's this whole space there that is presenting to you. It's just a flat surface. Well, what if I was able to attach stuff to that? And the visual, let's look at the visual on the graphic here. I would have, it's like shelves that come out. We build cabinets like this. Now, and she saw that, what an applicability to refrigerators. So just these small ways in which that these two influenced our world. Now, probably the most important concept here is, of course, the idea of worthy performance. Now, beyond the notion of mechanized work and rudimentary manufacturing and whatnot being beneath human dignity, he did feel that there was a relationship. There's a relationship that exists between our accomplishment and the amount of effort we put into that. That ratio, in order for something to be a worthy performance, you have to accomplish something with the effort. The accomplishment should maybe at least equal. So at least you have a 1-to-1 ratio for the effort you're getting in accomplishment. If there was more effort with less accomplishment, he felt that was unworthy performance. And that was a diagnostic criteria that he used. If someone's doing a lot but not producing a lot, people like this, then something's wrong. Something in the mechanisms, somebody's there all day and they're working, but their productivity is not where it should be or where it potentially could be based on the time studies that were done, then something's wrong. this ratio, you should be getting at least 1-for-1. If not, you should be getting something much more than 1. If you think about time as the effort that we put in, a measure of our effort is the amount of time we spend doing something, and our employer is paying us by the hour, then the more we can get done in that hour, the more valuable that hour is. So if as long as I can keep you there for 8 hours, but I can get you to accomplish more during those 8 hours, that's where your profit is. That's where and so industry was very interested in this, but also individuals in order to feel accomplished. And when you have a task in front of you, when you're studying, you may spend hours and hours studying for something, and yet it still did not accomplish what you thought it was. So essentially you have to re-examine your effort to see if it can produce better accomplishment. And what these two people give us is this great chart, Gilbert's behavioral engineering model, that allows you to examine a situation in which too much effort is not producing enough accomplishment and find out what is going wrong. Now, interestingly enough, in my world of education, of course, we emphasize training. And this is a widespread perspective as to how to deal with productivity. Training. Show the person how to do it. Show the person how to do it quickly. All of those things. When I was in school at Boise State, one of the things that they drove home was that training should be your last resort. It was very interesting, and this is sort of like, it's the last thing you should do. If you have an employee that is not being productive despite their effort, training's the last thing, because it's the most expensive. It takes the person out of the workplace, takes another person into that training mode. It's time consuming. Meanwhile, you're not getting anything, not even the minimal, out of that person. And really, from a cost benefit analysis, it's really not the best way to do those things. We turn to this chart where training is in here, but you see it's only part of the interventions that we can do when we're actually looking at our own productivity. And we use this on an industrial scale, but you can also use this on your own scale. You could examine a task that you have in front of you, a chore that you need to get done, or a project that you have. I'll use the example of a project for each one of these and see how will I analyze the kinds of problems that I may encounter in that project in order to maximize my efficiency and my accomplishment for my effort. So it started off, I'm going to start off with this example as I go through here, that I'm going to be building a little playground playset. I built one last summer for my granddaughter in my backyard, and I'll use that as my example. Now, the way this chart is organized is you have, across the top, you have issues regarding information and knowledge. Then you have instrumentation, these are the tools, and then you have motivation, which is incentives. Down the left-hand column here, you have environment and individual. The environment is the workplace. The individual is the person whose accomplishment you want to have happen. So I'm talking about me at home. Those are my environments, and the individual. And in order to create this playground, what information, instrumentation, and motivation do I need? Okay, we can look at the first one here. The environment, my house, what information was there? Does the individual know what's expected them? Do people know how well they're performing? Are people given guidance about their performance? That would come in the form of the instructions that came with the kit that I bought, and going through and making sure I understood and the steps were there and what it's supposed, there are pictures of what it's supposed to look like. So the instructions played a role in the environment so that I could evaluate how good of a job I'm doing. in terms of my individual information, do I have the skills and knowledge needed to perform as expected? Can I read the instructions? Can I follow them? Okay. And is it well designed? This is where training comes in. Is well designed training that matches the performance requirements available? Now, interestingly enough, for this example, there were little icons in the instructions that if I wanted to, I could scan them with my phone and watch a video of someone putting it together. I never did. I didn't have to. The pictures were enough for me. But wow, there was this additional tool that was made available for me as an individual. If it wasn't enough for me to get those instructions from the written and pictures, I could actually watch an instructional video about it. Now, moving on to the instrumentation, do I have the right tools and materials? Now, I ordered this thing as a kit, and it came with a separate piece of paper saying what materials I should expect. And I had, count them. There were a lot. Count them, make sure you have all the different pieces, nothing's missing. All the bolts and what came in their own little individual wrapped bags, so I knew what they were. But it also listed the tools I'm supposed to provide. You're going to need a hammer, you're going to need a screwdriver, you're going to power drill, and all that. Now, it came with bits. It came with bits for the power drill specific to the kind of bolts that I was going to be using. So it came with that, everything I need, and it gave me a list of the things that I need in terms of tools. The next thing under the individual capacity, do I know how to use these tools? Okay? Do I use the screwdriver or the power drill? This is really, do I have the physical capability of doing this, of lifting the pieces, holding them upright while I'm, drilling them in? Now, two things happened. First, I'll say the instructions said you should not do this alone. I did it alone anyway. That took some creativity. I had to get something to hold up the part of it while I was building it, stuff like that, So that was certainly stretching the capacity about it. But let's say, for example, I told you about those bits, right? Well, every time I encountered one of those screws, I would use this special screwdriver that I went out and bought because I didn't know the bits were in there. I never encountered them. It wasn't until about 3/4 of the way through the whole project that I found these bits, and I was like, oh, that would have been nice. I could have put that in my drill. Zzz, made those a lot easier. So a little capacity issue there with me. But do I know how to use the drill? Do I know how to put washers on and, line things up, use a level, all of that stuff, that's in the capacity parts of this, individual capacity. And finally, over here in motivation, adequate financial incentives. Was this something that, truthfully, it was a little expensive, and I wanted to make sure that it came out right. So I was sort of making sure I don't lose any money on these things. I mean, so I don't see a career development, anything with this happening, but the idea that I paid a lot for this, took on the responsibility to build it, and I was going to make sure that was there. And of course, my own personal motivation was I wanted to be able to surprise my granddaughter with this, rather large 3 swings, little castle slide sort of thing that I was creating. And there were some people I was able to recruit to help me with leveling the ground and all that stuff, But you see, if I ran into a problem, and here's the, as I'm approaching this job, I can take this chart and make sure all my T's are crossed and I's are dotted. But if I start running into a problem, do I need training? Do I need the right tool? And that's what my arm, after doing one of them, I actually did 2 of them. After doing this, particularly when I was doing the next one, my arm really was sore after like 4 days of building this thing. And that's when I found those things for my drill, the bits for my drill. I was like, what a great timing for that. In order for me to remain productive, I had to make sure I always had the right tools, always knew what the instructions were, going them, crossing off things when I got them done, that always keeping that surprised face of my granddaughter in mind to do that. And you see how you can use this to diagnose if you're having trouble with something. You could look at your own homework. Do I know what's expected of me? Do I have the skills to do that? Looking over, do I have the right tools, the right software, the right access to materials on the web, those kind of things? Do I have the time for this? Do I have the right attitude toward creating this? And then finally, incentives. Is this assignment worth points to me? Is it worth a lot of points? Is it worth, will it kill my grade if I don't get it done? And finally, what are my own personal motivations of learning, mastery, and accomplishment associated with these? This is how you figure out how to get productive. It's a phenomenal tool for that. And I really, again, this is why I refer to that degree as the most useful degree. I walked out with this, and I don't take this out and examine my life with it, but I use these ideas all the time, even for my own motivation. So really great chart there to do with that. Now, looking at organizational psychology, we had, psychology in the workplace, and now we're going to look at some other areas of influence here: the design of training, issues on leadership, the actual interview process, and what information do we gather to make good decisions on individuals coming into the workplace, team building and how team dynamics and group dynamics affect productivity, formal and informal work culture, which we'll spend a little bit of time on today, the balance between work and life, looking at those issues, particularly today, the Americans with Disabilities Act, how do we engage individuals who have different abilities in the workplace, work structure, supervision structure, actually physical space structure, again, from that other area, job analysis. These are important for, that's an important quality of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And finally, testing. Testing to see how well somebody's doing, testing to somebody's qualified for a particular job. All of these things come from the world of organizational psychology. Now, the next place I want to go is looking a little bit more at this formal and informal work culture. And what I'm referring to, I want to make sure I'm right clear from the beginning. Informal and formal work culture coexist in every organization, and it doesn't have to do with the fact that you can just come in with your PJs. That's not what we're talking about when we talk about an informal work culture. People use their first names and stuff like that. No. What we're talking about is that the business at hand, the task that you have, the nature of the business. Let's say it's a multi-station tattoo parlor, and you have different artists sitting at different stations, and there's a formal culture and there's an informal culture there. So let's say, in terms of the formal culture, if somebody was coming in to that organization and new at it, and they got hired, and they might get a policy manual and say, this is what we do, this is what we charge, this is how we greet our customers, because it's a brand, kind of thing. This is what you have to wear while you're working here. This is the way we treat our customers, the kind of the formal training that goes on. This is how you document your time in order to get paid. I don't know how those things really, maybe they're individual stations like at a beauty parlor, but anyway, let's assume they're all working for a boss, who the boss is, how do you get time off, how many vacations you have a year, when is it open, when is it closed, all of those things that you get in your orientation. Okay? Now, let's say, however, that you're working there for a while and you've made some friends with the other artists that are there, and they start letting you in on some of the tricks of the trade. Kind of thing like if you are out of a particular material that you need, there's actually a storage closet that we all put together, and we kind of put our extras there, and you can just take it as you want, give and take into the box, kind of thing. There's, let's say, the person, let's say there's a rule about, piercings and your own ink and whatnot, and there could be some informal rules about that, about what the boss likes, what they don't like. And anyway, the idea is that there's this formal part that's written up in the policy manual, and there's this informal part, and we need both of them. We need to be aware of both of them, because we might trip up Maybe one of the artists there is not really good, and you have a tendency to kind of like razz on him a little bit, and the friend of yours that you make comes over and says, don't bother him. He's the boss's nephew. That wasn't in the manual. That is informal culture telling you about a social circumstance that you have to be aware of in order to be a good survivor in that particular situation. At KVCC, I'll just say this story. Years and years ago, there's always this continual sort of issue about whiteboard markers and what happens to them, and when they dry out, how frustrating they are. Should the school provide them? Should we provide our own? This whole thing about this tool that we have, and if you're going to have whiteboards, you need to have something to write with it, on it. And so there was some discussions about that. And the formal policy at KV is if you want, KV will supply you with your own dry erase markers, but you have to fill out the form. You have to have it budgeted for it in your department. You fill out the form and it gets ordered for you, and then it comes to you as a package, and then you have your markers, kind of thing. Now, the faculty secretaries, however, determined that that was pretty inefficient because many times it's like last minute. Some faculty member will arrive at their class and they look, I don't have my markers with me. I don't have any. The 3 that are on the shelf are all dried out. So the secretaries took it on themselves to order massive supplies of these. So the secret was, don't order your own, just go see Melody about it, and she has literally a whole cabinet. Pick your color, and not just because there's nowhere that's officially part of her job. We're all officially supposed to be ordering our own markers for our departments. Nobody does. We all go to Melody's cabinet, and we're all happy. So there's this formal, informal. That poor person who never learns that Melody has these is busy filling out that form, getting their own, which is fine, but it's again one of their to-do list items here. So let's take a look at these concepts here of formal and informal culture here. Let's look at formal culture. Comes in our orientation, the manual, and the specific duties associated with our job. There's the informal work culture is hidden. It is more efficient, it's informal, and you get it by networking with other individuals. And of course, we need both of these. Now, the networking part is very important because for years I worked in the field of disability and assisting people in rejoining the workplace despite them having a mental illness or a physical disability or something like that. And one of the sad consequences of being a person with a disability working in a competitive environment like that is that because of the social space that tends to grow between the regular workers and the individual that I'm working with, that individual rarely has access to the informal culture. It's one of the things that we have to think about when we're going into a workplace. It's not only can they do the job, not only can we get transportation happening, not only can we work with the organization to accommodate for whatever needs that individual has, but how do we get that individual to be enveloped into the informal social structure of that organization so they can learn all the secrets that we know are there, that will never appear on the training, they will rarely appear. Sometimes they do. I've worked with some places that this is the way we do things. This is the policy, this is the way we do it. And they do talk about that almost in a formal way. But oftentimes those individuals remain isolated and they remain less productive because they're not a part of that social support network that happened there. Okay, for assessment in this week's work, we're going to be looking at, in the discussion, which as I'm recording this, some of you have already posted in there, so that's great, the behavioral engineering model and problem solving, and then there's a quiz where I'm going to ask you to describe, from your own experience, examples of informal and formal culture. There we go. And that's it for this chapter. See if I can pick up the pace here a little bit. You guys are probably, take a stretch while I'm changing my slide here. We're going to go into chapter 14 now. Clipping right along. Chapter 14 has to do with lifestyle, and health. So, here is a graphic from the field of positive psychology having to do with the things that make up a happy life. We have enjoying daily pleasures, contributing to the greater good, and using skills for enrichment. All of these come together, form what we have as happiness. This is coming from a field of positive psychology. Now you wonder, well, why do we have to come up with something like positive psychology? Keep in mind that the birth of psychology, as much as a pure science, just understanding and curious about human beings, has always been there. But a lot of the money and funding has gone into helping us solve the ills of human experience. What do we do with depression? What do we do with mental illness? What do we do with substance abuse? And this, it's kind of downing. What do we do with individuals who have no motivation? How do we deal with that? Dealing with problems. When you think, if I walk up to somebody and say I'm a psychologist, it's almost guaranteed they think that I meet with people to discuss their problems. Positive psychology was a reaction to that. And there's positive psychology elements in all the different fields of psychology. But positive psychology itself said, let's start examining really successful people, happy people, couples that have been together for a really long time, and figure out, well, how'd they do it? And maybe that will teach us how to teach others who maybe have struggles with those different things. So that's where positive psychology comes from, and a lot of our health and wellness type focus within psychology arises from that. So here we have, everybody has stress. Now stress is a term that describes the emotional and physical experience we have when we appraise a situation and we come to the conclusion of our own appraisal that we lack the resources or capacity to deal with it. I know there's a desperately choke version of that definition. We're not going to go there. It has to do with our appraisal of our own capacity and resources to deal with the situation that's in front of us. When the situation surpasses our capacity and resources, we experience stress. Life is full of stressors. It's full of things that challenge our capacity for us to grow, change, learn, stay awake. All of these challenges in order to overcome the negative impacts of stress. So what we want to learn about is actually stress management. We can make decisions, and probably a good work in psychotherapy is to learning to say no, learning to set limits, learning to manage your time better, all of these things that will reduce stress. But ultimately, we still have to manage with the stress that does come through. So we can reduce the number of stressful things that we are, but then we also have to learn how to manage our stress. So we'll take a little bit of a look here about how stress actually impacts us. Here's our stressor. This is the cognitive process. This graphic is in the course book, but here's our stressor. That comes about, we appraise that particular stressor. Is it a challenge or a threat? If it's a challenge, we see it as a potential for gain or growth. It does surpass my capacities, but I'm seeing this as a growth process. Or it's a threat. It may lead to harm or loss and negative consequences. When we look at that, there's a secondary appraisal. Is there anything I can do about it? Do I have effective options or no options? And if there's effective options or something I can do, then it's a relatively low threat. If there's something I have no options, then we're highly threatened by it. And again, these are all our appraisals of the particular situation. Now, in this time period that we're on, this historic time of pandemic days, one of the things that we're observing as psychologists, and all of us really are observing, that there's just one thing after another. Is, we're separated from our support networks, we're isolated from work, some of us are out of work, financial troubles, worrying about getting sick, people we know who are sick, people who are worried that they might get sick, kids are home from school, how's their education going to be impacted? I was just talking to one of my racquetball partners the other day, and she says he watched his daughter go through senior year and really thinks that she should have to repeat it because nothing was gained, in that particular school system with his particular daughter. And he was just, wow, how is she going to go to college when she's missed this whole year? All of these stresses create, when they all come together, they create within us a phenomenon called crisis fatigue. Now, crisis fatigue in these coronavirus days manifests itself, and we have to engage coping styles in order to manage all of these stresses at the same time. There are two types of coping styles. There's problem-focused and there's emotion-focused. Now, problem-focused, so when we look at those situations in which we feel we don't have the capacity, we learn, we ask for help, and we get to work on it. That's how we address it, by solving the problem. Maybe we change a factor in it. Maybe we negotiate something different. Maybe faced with the stresses of our finances, we get rid of cable. We get rid of internet. We get rid of, maybe we park a car for a while and take it off the insurance and manage with one car for a while to try and, those are solving the actual problems associated with creating our stress. Taking each one of those individually. The other type of coping skills that we have that we would use at the same time are emotion-based, dealing with the actual stress itself. And that comes as self-care, staying hydrated, eating well, exercising, getting sleep, all of these things. How important it is in the stressful time to be doing self-care. It almost seems like, wow, I've got enough on my plate. Now you want me to take walks every afternoon. Yes, the more you have on your plate, the more you need to do those things for self-care. In fact, I just came across, there's a notion called square breathing that is making its rounds out there. And I've been trying it, and it's actually a very simple, in-the-moment sort of thing that you can do in order to address some of the biochemical and emotional things happening when you're stressed out. And it gets its term square because there's 4 parts to it, and it's very, very easy. It's simply a breathing exercise. We talk about deep breathing and relaxing and stuff. This is kind of a concrete way to look at this. Essentially, it says inhale for 4 seconds, hold it for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, and hold it for 4 seconds. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. And try doing that. And for me, it was very quick. For once, it was a focus because I'm counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, holding my breath, 4, down, kind of doing that cycle over and over. It was focusing my attention. And within 5 breaths, I was already feeling very different. It was a very, very powerful technique. I believe its origins are in the military, what people do when they're under stressful situations, probably the most stressful situations that people can be under, what they do in terms of a breathing exercise to help them get through. So we have these different coping styles, and we get down to the assessment for this week. And what we have in Chapter 14, I'm having you complete a stress inventory to getting a value on your stress. And again, people have been in there already. And that's it. for this particular week. So, long drawn out video, but we got two things. We are in the last throes of this class. Make it strong, finish strong. Get these things. You have a nice break from class coming right up in just a few weeks. Concentrate on those projects, getting those in, and I look forward to seeing you in the discussion boards. Take care.